Hello, everybody, and welcome to this week's episode of Goals Do Come True. I am really excited today. We're going to have a long, hard, deep, and can I say, dive into Mitch Hartwell. That doesn't mean anything, does it? But Erik Everhard, a top adult film star. He's joining me today, and we're going to be talking about, amongst other things, Unleashing Your Sexual Superpowers, which he's written a book about, and you can get the first 3 chapters from his website, and I'm sure you'll be gagging to download and obtain the rest of the book after you've had that full slide into his life. Anyway, Erik, thank you very much for joining me, and over to you. Tell us a little bit about yourself and how goals, more importantly, because it is a goals related podcast, how they formed a part of your life. But go for it, man.
Yeah, well, I mean, when I think about goals, I would actually go back to the whole genesis of my career. When I started, so I was a student going to a massage therapy school, right? So every day, go there, do massage therapy, go home, rinse, repeat, okay? And then one day, we're having lunch, and we had this big cafeteria, you bring your lunch, sit down, and they had some local newspapers there. So you pick up a newspaper, you have your lunch, go about your day, go back to doing some massage. So this day, I open the newspaper, I'm looking at, what's going on in the city, the band listings, all that stuff. And then I see this fucking ad, and it's about 4 inches by 4 inches. And it says, looking for women and couples to do a porno movie. And I'm like, oh my God, right? Like, never have I seen that before, first off. Second, years prior, there was a girl that I used to live with, and she used to joke because sometimes we'd watch porno movies together, and she always would say, she goes, "Oh, you got a big dick. You could do porno, right?" I'm like, yeah, thanks, sweetheart, right? Because most people, their girlfriends are gonna say they're fabulous, no matter if you suck, right? Like, no girl is gonna just trample on your emotions if she's in love with you. So you always take it with a grain of salt. So I'm like, yeah, sure, sweetheart, great. But now I see this ad, Doug, and I'm like, oh man, Debbie always said I'd be good at this. So that started the process. And so of course I thought, okay, well, I'm gonna call these people, right? Lo and behold, what do I find out, especially after now having been in the porno industry for 23 years, that 99% of men cannot do it. So this company, also knowing this, what do they do when I phone them? They proceed to hang up on me. And that was the thing, I thought, okay, well, hey, I gave it a shot. Let's go back to our life, right? So I go back to massage, go back to my life. And it was probably 7 months later. Same scenario. Lunchroom, eating my lunch, going through the paper, bam, there's that fucking ad again. And I'm like, And now I'm thinking, well, God, I really didn't apply myself towards this. So then this, this was my first goal, right? I'm like, okay, I'm going to be relentless. So I called, and I called, and I called, and I called some more, right? Eventually, finally, one day I get, who turned out to be the actual owner of the studio, I get him on the phone, and he says to me, he goes, well, tell you what, why don't you come down to our studio, and we will take some Polaroids of you to see, for the people back in the day that they don't know what Polaroids are, that used to actually happen. We'll take some Polaroids of you, and we'll see if you've got the equipment, and maybe one day in the future we can get you a job. Hey, that's better than hanging up on me, right? Like, we're making progress here, Doug.
Yeah, absolutely. Progress, not perfection at this stage.
Exactly, we're making progress. So I go down to their studio, and it's in this seedy area of East Vancouver, and I go up the stairs, and I knock on this big metal door, and they open it, and they look at me, and they say, hey, are you Mitch? I'm like, yeah. And then they just deadpan stare me in the face, and they just say to me, can you fuck a girl for us right now? And imagine I'm 21 years old, right? Like, I'm just wide-eyed. Like, this was the last thing I expected was going to come out of their mouths. And I think I just eked out this little squeaky, like, yep, that was it, right? And then it was on. So that, that was my first foray into the business. And, obviously that first day I had no problems. It was even something I've talked to people about, and I'm wondering how you and other guests have this too. I think a lot of the times the goals that we have and the goals that we achieve, we actually don't believe we will fail. Like it's not even in our conscious awareness, because I've had people ask me, well, what were you thinking about that first scene? Did you think, well, will I be able to do this? And I said, that actually never went through my mind. Like, there was no part of me that actually thought I couldn't do it. And maybe that was naive of me, could very well be, but it served me because in the moment I was like, no, man, like what? Who would ever have erectile dysfunction? I've never had erectile dysfunction at home, right? So,
and at 21, I mean, come on, at 21, we're okay back then.
But I can't tell you how many 21-year-olds I've seen that they get stuck in their mind, right? And I've always said to people, the worst words that can ever be uttered in your brain are these ones. I hope I get hard. Just that word hope, immediately we're starting a downhill spiral because you're already on this negative slant. And then of course, if it doesn't happen, now you start making meaning of that. And then it starts this tsunami of negative emotions that eventually leads to you having so much adrenaline and so much worry and so much shame that it is like a little inchworm trying to be dragged out of a hole, right?
So you got to go all in.
You have to go all in. It's not only that, it has to be irrational self-confidence, really.
Irrational belief in yourself.
Irrational, because like I said, as I look back on that moment, I think to myself, Jesus Christ, what the fuck was I thinking, right? And then it led to, that same thing led to now when I was going to, actually apply to get into the business, because I probably did maybe 8 scenes for this company, 6 to 8 scenes, right? And it was a little Canadian web company up in Vancouver. There was no thought of mine that this was going to be a career. Actually, the first time I did it, I thought it was going to be a one-off because honestly, all I could think about was this would be the coolest story to have in the old folks' home. Like I really thought, Doug, I said, when I'm in, Depends undergarments, I'm in my fucking old man diapers and I'm sitting around the table playing poker with the guys, and we're all senile, I will have the best story ever. That was it.
Excellent. Then, if you can remember it, of course.
Yeah, if I can remember, right?
Yeah, I just got to keep repeating it but no, that's cool.
And then, the fact that they gave me a little bit of money, I thought, well, that's even a bonus. And I just put it out of my mind. And it was about 3 days later, my phone rang and it's that company. I answer the phone and they just say, hey, what are you doing? I'm like, nothing. And they're like, can you come by and do that again? And that's where it started, right? And then shortly later, I learned because the guy who edited the movies for them said to me, he goes, the owner used to do all the scenes. Well, the reason the owner did all the scenes was they had never found another guy that could do it until me.
Wow.
Every other guy had failed, right? So that was interesting. And, this was probably about 6 months later, the editor told me, he goes, hey, you know what? You're really good at this. Probably no one will tell you, you're really good. You should think about going down to Los Angeles. You could make some serious money. And again, 21 naive, I'm like, there's money in this business? What? So it was an interesting process. And then, when I decided, okay, this is what I'm going to do. I actually had a friend of mine, because I used to work the counter of a super hardcore gym in Vancouver. So, this gym had every avatar of which you would consider prototypical meathead possible. It was cops, it was bikers, it was strongmen, it was bodybuilders, it was drug dealers, it was all of it, right? Like there was a sparse few women in the gym and they were jacked. They were serious workout girls, right? So there was this one guy who I'd become friends with and his name was Jeff. And he was at the time the biggest influence on my life at that. Now, full disclosure, Jeff was the resident steroid drug dealer of the gym, right?
Right. Yep.
But he was this was the first time I'd come across somebody who was like an entrepreneur. Like this was a businessman. And I remember when I told him, hey, I did a movie, right? He's like, oh, like his brain just started turning. He's like, okay, well, we got to find out more about this and et cetera, et cetera. So when we did the research, he said to me, he says, hey, look, I have a gut feeling that you could be really big at this. He goes, if you want, I will help you financially to get down to Los Angeles, because he used to travel there. I'd never been to the States. And he's like, I could introduce you to a couple of people and then it's all on you. And I thought about it for about a week and then I dropped out of school and I said, okay, we're going to do this. And then started the process of putting together the plan of action, because especially back then, there was no internet, there was no email, there was no way of contacting any of these people. And I remember we actually put together a show reel on VHS tapes, right? And so I got this reel edited. It was like a 5-minute reel of some scenes that I had done, mixed with some, just random footage. We put my address, we put my pager number on it because I didn't even have a cell phone then, right? I just had a pager. And we mailed those things out. So I mailed those. I found an AVN magazine. I found all the postal addresses of all the different companies. And I'm sending these tapes by post, right? Just sending these VHS tapes randomly to all these different companies. And then, of course, then came the Consumer Electronics Show, which is where the porn industry back in that time, they used to have their own section. And so I went there, and I went there armed with like another 20 VHS tapes, right? And I'm going to these booths and I'm handing these things out, and I'm like, hey man, like, here's who I am. Like, this was my, my de facto business card, right? So I'm handing these things out. And then I really lucked out that when I got down to the States, I had a lot of really serendipitous things happen to me. Mm-hmm. For one, first scene, I got booked because my friend Jeff, he knew a guy at a local gym there. Right? Because of course, with the drugs and everything, he knew people in gyms. And that guy got me a gym membership, and he said, hey, he goes, I know of an actor that works here, that trains here. If I see him, I'll introduce you. So the next week, Vince Boyer walks in, and the guy at the counter introduces me to him. And, Vince was a funny guy because I love him. He's awesome, but he's very East Coast. He's from Boston. He's kind of short, he's like 5'6", 5'7", and he's like a tough, angry guy, right? So he didn't want to mince words with me, and I just woke up, I was all nice and Canadian. I'm like, hey man, pleased to meet you. And he's like, just gets a grunt, and he's like, what are you doing next week? And I'm like, nothing. He goes, okay, there's a gangbang. Show up. That was it, right? I'm like,
there's a gangbang.
There's a gangbang.
Show up.
Well, right? I said,
wow.
Okay, that's something, right? That's a foot in the door. So yeah, that was my first scene in Los Angeles, was for them. And that was actually for one of the biggest companies in the adult industry at the time. And the fact that I was able to stand toe to toe beside their best actor, as soon as that scene was done, he came over to me and he says, what are you doing tomorrow? And I'm like, nothing. And he just looks at me, he goes, you're working.
You're working. What intrigues me is that you going from Canada to the States with a drug dealer. That was going through my head, and it's like, whoa. But you got there and you got your break.
Not only that. You have to understand, because he had done that border run so many times, he even told me, like when I went to the States, I had my little car, I packed a tiny duffel bag. Because of course knew about running across the border. He's like, hey, you got to tell him you're going for a weekend across the border. He goes, so all you are going to take with you on this journey to the States is what'll fit in that little gym bag. So I had 2 pairs of jeans, 3 shirts, 3 pairs of socks. When I arrived in LA, he gave me $300, and he paid for 1 month's rent in this complete utter shithole of an apartment in the ghetto, right? So I was the ghetto, North Hollywood, so it was not a nice area. And it was 1 room, right? Like it was just 1 room, no furniture, no nothing. And I stayed there for 6 months. I slept on the floor. I didn't have a mattress. The clothes that I wore were my pillow under my head, because I was like, well, it's death, jail, or success. And that's something that I've always looked at life from that perspective. If you're going to set a goal, you have to, or at least this is what's worked for me, Doug. You need to burn the ships, metaphorically speaking. It's like Spartan. Like, if you have a plan B, you're never going to fucking succeed at plan A. Every time I've made my life so dire that the only way forward was through, then I was successful. Whenever I had some sort of little, if it doesn't work out, I've got XYZ, never works out.
Okay, so burn the ships. Yeah, no plan B. If you're in business, if you're going for something and going for the goal, that's the only way to achieve it, I would say. Yeah, no, I like that. Got to go 100%. You can get an aeroplane off the ground with 40% power, but the pilot always puts 100% into it, and that's you've got to go. Cool. So we're now down North Hollywood in a dive, bumping into porn stars, gang banging, getting paid though, right?
Getting paid very well. Getting paid
very well. So why did you stay in the crummy apartment for 6 months?
Because at the time I had a roommate that I used to live with in Vancouver, and he was coming down. So he eventually moved down, and then we got a nice apartment together. But I was still so unsure about everything, right? Like, I was brand new. I was in a new country, new culture, trying to figure out everything. Technically a illegal alien, right?
Yes. Yeah.
So I was trying to figure out, and I was also trying to figure out, like, is this something that I want to do for the rest of my life? Like, there's something that's kind of beautiful about being young, right? And I think we can both sort of wax poetic on this in a sense. And when I was doing my studies in NLP college, this was something that they talked about, where the area of the brain that understands consequences for men, it's not necessarily fully formed until you're about 27 years old. And
Not
when
57, not 57, 27,
Yeah,
not 57.
but you see that reflected, right? It's like, well, most of everybody that's in jail is under 30. Like, there are definitely correlations between, hey, I can't really understand the ramifications of what I'm going to do. And for me, it was definitely that. It's like, oh, let's just drop out of school. Let's run the border. Let's go to the States. Like, what could go wrong, right? And
just get jailed forever, right? Pretty much.
Yeah,
but you don't think that.
Invincible from that perspective.
Yeah.
Which I think, in a lot of ways, I mean, obviously shit can go wrong, but there's a saying they'll say often in American football, right? No risk it, no biscuit.
Right.
And I think that's very true with a lot of things, right? Like, if you want all the jewels, if you want the rewards, you got to take some risk.
Yeah.
If you just play it safe, well, now you're living a sort of mundane existence. And I think a lot of people are so afraid to go take a risk. They never live their authentic self, and they never live their real dreams, their real goals, right? Because if you got a goal and it's some big goal, I mean, you gotta put stuff on the line. Otherwise, It's never going to come true.
We get that. We talk on my podcast about big, hairy, audacious goals. So, I mean, that was one. Illegally entering the United States to become a porn star. That's a big, hairy, audacious goal. But have you got any others along the way that you know?
From there, it was, okay, now I want to become the best at what I did. So I eventually secured a deal as a director, right? So then I was directing for the same company that I initially started with. From there, I moved on to producing and owning my own product. And from there, when we're talking about, crazy goals, I'm actually a partner with two other gentlemen, and we built a luxury resort in Costa Rica. And that was, I mean, when you want to talk about goals, I mean, the work that went into doing that was unbelievable, mainly because it was like building on Gilligan's Island in a sense. Mm-hmm. So there's no roads to get to where our property is. Everything came by boat. The process of building it took 15 years, 12 years.
Wow.
And that's something that I want your audience to appreciate, and something that I've sort of noticed when I look at young people today, right? Because I think one of the negatives that a lot of young people face today is that they want this immediacy, right? Like, I want to be YouTube famous today, because I saw this one kid, he was making $6 million playing video games, blah, 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 blah. It's like, well, okay, that's awesome, right? But you have to at some point fall in love with the process, because you may never get the riches. So if you're not having fun, if you're not at least enjoying the process of getting there, what are you doing it for?
No, that's very important. And if you do enjoy what you're doing, then it's not actually working either. It's not a physical job because you're loving what you do. So yes, that's quite an important thing. So the resort, it's still up and running and successful.
We're still up and running. We're still doing that. I mean, obviously, now during the COVID.
Yeah, it's struggling a bit.
And so then I had my long time where I was, top 2 in the world, because some people would say I'm number 1, some people say I'm number 2, but let's say top 2 in the world for a long time in the adult industry. And then I started to become a little disillusioned with it.
Bit same old, really.
Yeah, it's like at some point, and it's tough when I try to impress this upon people, because people are like, oh my God, that would be the best job in the entire world. And I really learned, right? Because, if you can start to view having sex as a job, there is no career out there. I don't care, you're Beyonce, you're Brad Pitt, blah, blah, blah. Like, there's going to be a day where you're like, hey, we're clocking in today. Like, I don't feel like singing on stage. I don't feel like doing this. I don't feel like doing that, right? Mm-hmm. Because there's doing something purely for fun, and there's doing something on a professional level. And when you mix professionalism with it, there's a lot of expectations. There's a lot of things you need to do that you may not want to do, but it's just part of the process. So I started to get these ideas of, well, okay, what am I really here to do? What's my impact? How are things going to change? And this was about, call it 2009. And I met this one Bulgarian guy from San Francisco through some friends. He had a relationship workshop, and I thought, oh, okay, I'm like, well, I'll take this, right? And it was a real eye-opening thing for me. And there was a bunch of men in the group, and they had mentioned this thing called NLP. And I'm thinking to myself, what the hell is that? So they kind of sort of explain it to me, and I'm thinking, oh, okay, well, it's sort of like, it's like hypnosis. It's like, what is this, right? And I thought to myself, in the sense of, well, that might be like really useful for business, for this, for that, right? Like, negotiations. I thought, oh, let's try it out. So I ended up going to one of the top schools in the country, which was located in Marin County in Northern California. And when I went there, it was nothing like I thought it would be. Here I was thinking I'm going to learn this stuff where maybe I can, negotiate or manipulate or do something. No, this was the most holistic, like bare your soul, like let's peel back the onion layers of yourself, go through all your childhood traumas. It was that kind of experience. And I went through it for 3 years. So when that was all done, right, and I'd gone through all the levels of the programming and everything, then I was just really left with these kind of existential questions, right? Like, well, okay, what is my purpose? Right? That was the big one. Like, what's my purpose, right? Because, I'd had these goals, I had achieved so many of them, and now I was like, what, now I'm not feeling fulfilled, right? Fulfilled in my life. Let's call it, I don't know, some people call it a midlife crisis, or you just say that, well, I've just lost, like, I don't know what to do. So these questions were so at the forefront of my mind that I was like, okay, I need answers. So, and I wasn't finding any. So eventually I knew of a business coach in San Francisco, and he used to take entrepreneurs down to the Amazon jungle, and they would drink the shamanic medicine ayahuasca. Are you aware of that?
I'm not. I had a quick look on your website about it, but I didn't have time to delve into it a bit deeper. So share with us.
It's one of the most potent psychedelics in the world, right? It's a tea that's made from brewing two plants together, and you drink that tea, and you're flying, Doug. You are.
Is it hallucinogenic then?
It's very hallucinogenic.
Okay.
And not in a fun way necessarily. Like it's very holistic, and it'll show you all about your life. It'll show you maybe what you've done wrong. It'll show you about love. It'll show you about fear. It'll show you your shadow side. And it's a very long, arduous, sometimes very scary process. And it, of course, it involves you vomiting the whole time as well. You've got this bucket. So you're in this group of people, you got this big bucket in front of you, and every 10 minutes you're like, bleh, you're thrown up in the bucket. And
you're really selling it to me.
Yeah. Go do it, Doug.
Go do it. Yeah. Pop down to the Amazon, throw your guts up. Yeah.
But
you'll thank me later.
So I did that, and I started to get more answers, right? And then, so everything started to come together around, let's say 2014, 2015. So I had a number of lovers in Los Angeles that were civilians, and they would all say the same thing to me. They were like, hey, I don't know what you're doing here to me, but this is awesome. And when our relationship ends, you need to write a book or write some stuff down so my future, ex-husband can follow your steps, and maybe I can have the same treatment, right? And that was what really started me down the path of coaching men, because then I realized I really stepped back and I looked, okay, when I look at this crazy experiment of life that I've gone through, because, for most people, there's no way that you would necessarily sleep with 5,000 people, period, or that you would still be alive after you did it, right? So I was like, well, how can I take all that knowledge and all that wisdom that there'd be no other way to obtain, and how can I bring it to men so that they don't have to go through that, but they can take all the nuggets of the wisdom and use it to level up their sex lives? So that's what started me down the path of, okay, like let's use what I've gone through for the last, 20 something years and help men. And that's what eventually led to me starting to write the book.
Unleash your sexual superpowers, everybody.
Yeah.
We'll make sure that, there's a link, one to the website where you can, as I say, download the first 3 chapters. That's good. So we've done the big, hairy, audacious goals. Yeah, no, that's really, really cool. We're getting towards the end of our time together, but I really could talk and listen to you all day long. I'm sure there's loads and loads and loads of other stories. But before we wrap up, a nugget. I always throw out, like, come on, goal setting, something that we've not touched on, something that because I put people under pressure on this one, some good stuff comes up.
Yeah.
So, Erik, before we finish, come on, a big nugget for goal setting and life.
Nugget for goal setting and life? Well, for me, the big changes that have occurred for me, I would say are first, completely, you got to alter your belief system, especially around what you're capable of. Someone asked me, like, well, what's your big goal? And I said, I want to be the fucking Tony Robbins of the sex industry. I was like, that's a big goal.
That's
right?
good.
Like, that's a good one. And what I've started doing is every day I start planning my day in 30-minute increments, because I found, okay, like if I know in every 30-minute chunk, here's what has to happen, that's the only way that I can sort of move forward. Because, if you're going to achieve your goals, there has to be metrics at some point, right?
Yes.
And real objective metrics. Like I talk about that stuff with my clients too. I said, well, we've got, if you look at sex, I mean, there's things where, we've got subjective things, connection, intimacy, these things are subjective. Objective, how many times did you get it off? How long did you last in the bedroom? How hard did you get? These are objective metrics, and those things we can improve, right? And what gets measured gets improved. So you got to look at what aspects of your sexuality, what's in your control, and what can you have a metric about that you could always improve on. I have some guys, they suffer from premature ejaculation, and I have them going through a program, and they'll tell me this, like, okay, well, today it was 7 minutes. I'm like, awesome, because I say, time it. Let's find out. Let's get some data, right? And then they go back and they're like, oh, it was 9 minutes today. I'm like, it's fucking 2 minutes more, man. Like, let's, you got to build it up. But if you don't have any metrics, like, you don't know where you're going. And it's like, well, we could say, Doug, I want you to drive to London, right? And to say, just get on the road. Just get on any road, right? Like, well, what's the chances that you're going to arrive in London if you just start driving on any old road? Like, you got to have a map, and you got to have markers that say, oh, hey, we're on the right path. Those are the things that I think, for me at least, have something that's totally out there, but it's the big thing that you're reaching for. And then have some serious fucking structure in your day to know that, okay, hey, you know what? I'm chipping away every day, and I've got these metrics that show me I'm moving forward and I'm not going backwards.
There you go. See, perfect. Throw it in there. The magic nuggets come out. Thank you very much.
Nuggets.
The magic nuggets. Right. So that's it, everybody, for this morning's afternoon episode, whenever you're listening. It's been an absolute pleasure. Obviously going to have to download a couple of your films now, just for research purposes, of course.
Purposes. Very understandable. You got to do your research.
You've got to do the research. That's Erik, everybody. We're going to have his stuff in the show notes, so you'll be able to get a hold of him. It's got an amazing picture. I'm looking at the picture of the bridge on your website. Is that Prague?
That is Prague. That's where I'm residing currently.
Oh, yeah. So I've eaten at the restaurant at the bottom of the bridge there. How cool is that?
Yeah.
Amazing. Thank you very much for joining me. It's been an absolute pleasure, and we could talk all day, but I've used up one of your half-hour increments, so we've got to go. We've got to go.
Best half-hour increment of today.
Thank you very much for that, Erik. We'll catch up soon.
100%. Thank you.